Hello and welcome to Sales Gambit. I'm your host, Ashish, CEO of Convin, a conversation intelligence platform for the sales team. In today's episode of Sales Gambit, we'll go for the top programs to scale B2B prospects meetings. We have our expert, Michael Phelan, with us today. Michael is the principal and founder of Go to Market Pros, and he has over 30 years of experience in sales and marketing. What more do you need? I'm pretty much sure that this is going to be a great session with him. Welcome to Sales Gambit, Michael. I'm super excited to host you today.
Thank you for having me on, Ashish. Look forward to the conversation.
Sure. I have briefly introduced you to the audience already, right? But I'd love to hear from you. How did you get into sales? And you have been in the industry for long enough, right, to see the market has evolved. It'd be great to understand your sales journey till now.
I started my early stage career. I started in a sales role and sales management role. Then I went into business unit management and marketing and new product development at companies like Reebok and Polaroid and Staples. And then over the last 10 years or so, I started to focus much more on technology companies, SaaS companies, technology companies, companies introducing newer, more differentiated solutions. And I formed my own consultancy, Go to Market Pros. And I work with companies who are looking to ramp revenue in the US. Either they're in the US and they're looking to grow, or they're coming in from Europe or Asia, and they want to kind of come up with a smart go-to-market strategy. So I'm very much focused on the connection between sales and marketing, and how you go from how you go to generate leads, to generating meetings, to generating opportunities in sales. So I'm very much focused on that piece that kind of creates the meetings for companies.
And is it specifically now about software sales, or is it about any other kind of sales as well?
It's not specifically about software sales. I've worked with companies who are producing new hand sanitizers, for example, looking to sell to the Walmarts and the big retailers of the country. I'm working on a project right now that's about data scraping. How do you use external data to drive better decisions at marketplaces and retailers? So it's a lot of different products. Some of them are technology based, some of them are not. Some of them, anything that's technology based, a lot of them are definitely software and SaaS based today. But these programs are not necessarily limited to one vertical or one technology. They can be applied across many industries.
Understood. And outbound prospecting, if we sort of think about it, right, where you are mostly centered in, which is around, your experience lies mostly around helping generate meetings and demos and all that stuff. Outbound prospecting is an effective lead generation strategy, but it's definitely not an easy task, right? I mean, most organizations still struggle to implement it at scale. They can implement it, they can see initial results, but then scaling it as your organization scales, it becomes very, very difficult. And that's why looking at these specific ways of improving the programs on how to get those meetings would be very important. What is your take on this? Why are people not able to scale these things?
Yeah, so there's a couple of key reasons. One is that sales leadership, sales management has never really introduced a set of programmatic approaches to drive sales.
Okay.
Most of the outreach tends to be very company centric, right? It's really, if you think about what buyers want and what buyers need, very rarely do the sellers reach out in that way, right? So they're, hey, we got this great technology, can we get a demo, right? So who cares, right? So you kind of, the better companies or the better programs are much more buyer centric. So for example, sellers are always selling to buyer pain. You must have pain here. This must be frustrating, or this must be broken. But buyers don't buy based on pain, right? Buyers based on what I call performance gaps. So if you say to a seller, hey, your system is probably slow and outdated and you should buy our software, they probably know that, but they'll probably ignore it too. But if you say to a buyer, hey, we've done a best in practice study. We've looked at the top 50 companies in your industry. They're all handling this challenge or opportunity better than you, and here's why. We'd love to talk to you about how you can bridge that performance gap, and go from slightly under best in class to better than best in class. That's a much more compelling thing because they're much more motivated by what their peer companies are doing, and they're much more motivated by gaps in performance than they are to buyer pain. But you see the lens changing, and we're very focused on, think about a professional that walks into their board meeting and the board says to them, hey, why is this company performing better than you on this axis? Why is it that our website is not as good as theirs? Why is it that, their process is much better than ours? And
Yeah.
if you as a business professional don't have a good answer to that, most of them go, I don't know, right? But if you're able to say, I'm glad you brought up that process. It's one we're looking at. In fact, we're working with a company that's doing a best practices study on that. And these are
Yeah.
the reasons why we're behind on performance. And in fact, we'd like to invest some money to bridge that gap. That's a much better answer, right, than I don't know. So think about putting buyers in a position where you could help them be better at their jobs. You can help them answer the questions their senior executives have. You can help them bridge performance gaps where they're behind. That's important to the company. If you change your mindset, then, hey man, can I get a demo? That's a much more sophisticated buyer-centric reach out. So the question is, how do you do that in a systematic and programmatic way so that it's not just your best rep doing it, it's every rep doing it, if that makes sense?
No, that's really fair, right? And I think uh, just reaching out to people with what you have to offer does not provide any sort of connect that they would realize to sort of even explore your product further. But if you're reaching out to them with a reason on why they should be looking at it and why they should care about it, or probably the matrices that they should care about, then you have a chance. I think that's what you're trying to summarize.
Yeah, it's focusing on them and their peers is the key thing. It's focusing on, who are the top companies in the industry in e-commerce? Where do they stand versus them? What are the gaps and how do they bridge it? And you're coming with insights and information. So, for example, if you're trying to sell to major retailers and you're talking to Target, and you're selling, say, advanced marketing automation and personalization software, of which there are tons of companies trying to sell to Target.
Yeah.
You say, hey, I've looked at Sephora, and Sephora's doing X, Y, and Z. I've looked at your website. You're not doing X, Y, and Z. This is probably the reason why your conversion rates are much lower than Sephora. Everybody's going to take that call. It's you're coming with insights and information on their best in class peers. Everybody's interested in that. I used to work with Staples, and every time we would interview someone from Office Depot or Office Max, all the product people wanted to interview them, all the marketing people wanted to interview them, and so forth, because they, want to gather competitive intelligence. They're fascinated with what the other person is doing in their industry. What happens a lot with salespeople is you reach out to Target and they say, well, we got a banking study. I don't care. I'm not in banking. Or we got an airline study. Or we don't have a retailer study, but we'll send you our study on, software. Spend the time to really understand the ecosystem and understand the players that you're selling into and be able to give them insights and advice on who's doing a better job than them and why. So it's a very different mindset. And then marketing has to enable that by doing the studies, giving them the best practices, and helping them with the tools to benchmark people or compare people or give them a score. So you see a lot of companies are doing, hey, why don't you have a maturity model? Why don't you, go through this maturity model, we'll tell you what platform you're at, how to get to the next level. That's that kind of selling. Or we'll give you a score on how you're doing solving this problem. Or we'll compare and contrast where you're at versus somebody else. These are the kinds of things that companies love, and it gets at kind of more what's relevant to the buyer than what's relevant to the seller, if that makes sense.
That's definitely fair, Michael. I have a very specific question, to go ahead with. why do you think it's so difficult to have B2B prospecting done in a proper way, right? Because all of these situations, you get to know what their issues are, what you should focus on while reaching out to these people, right? Depends on the prospecting part of it, right? Why do you think it's so tricky to have proper B2B prospecting done?
I think it's actually harder now with COVID and work from home. You know,
Yeah.
initially, I thought it'd be easier to get prospect meetings when people are working from their home environment. And the reason why I thought, and other people in the industry thought it'd be easier, would be people have more time, right?
Yeah.
There's not as many fire drills. You know, there's a lot of meetings in corporations. You know, everybody's in meetings all day long, right? Most of these meetings could be an email. But people go from meeting to meeting to meeting and they get nothing done, right?
Yeah.
But now that they're in their own work environment, their meetings have dropped enormously. They're more productive in general. And the research shows that people are more productive in a work from home environment than in an office environment. But the extra time that they may get an extra 2 or 3 hours in their day. They're more reluctant to give it to a vendor to pitch them in their home office environment than they are in their business environment. So you have to have more value. So I think what's happened is there's 256,000 BDRs in the United States, right? And in some industries, they're selling into 100 top prospects or 1,000 top prospects. But if you look at the amount of sellers and the amount of BDRs versus the amount of buyers in any industry, it's heavily swayed towards sellers, right? If you look at the MarTech landscape, right? Tens of thousands of companies in there, right?
Yeah.
And not that many big buyers, you know, Fortune 5,000, Fortune 10,000. So there's a huge mismatch of much more sellers. So I think one of the reasons why people are struggling right now is they don't have this programmatic approach, and they haven't armed the salespeople with a programmatic approach. You know, I'll give you another one. You know, McKinsey, for example, is highly successful selling to its past alumni program, right? There's so many people that have been in and out of McKinsey that now have these great jobs all over the world at these companies. So what McKinsey does is it has a program that wraps its arms around all their alumni. The same thing for Bain, the same thing for all of these companies. And they do alumni programs, and they do alumni content, and they give value to alumni. And then the reps selling new consulting projects can tap into that network. So they nurture the network, they build a network, and they proactively mine it for new business opportunities. And that's a programmatic approach. For example, you can do the same thing with let's make sure we fully leverage our board of directors, our advisors, all our management team. They all have contacts and networks into your target accounts. But how many
Yeah.
companies have mapped on LinkedIn? Let's look at all our vendors. Let's look at all our employees. Let's look at all our contractors. Let's look at all our alumni. Let's look at, you know, everything we've got. Let's map them to our target list of accounts, and let's figure out, you know, where do we have opportunities for introductions and so forth. But it's a programmatic approach where you sit down with a member of your board of directors and you say to them, hey, we have 500 accounts we're targeting. We have mapped you to 7 of these accounts and these specific individuals. We've written you an introduction. And would you be kind enough to send that and either co-host a meeting with us or request a meeting because you're on our board? So a lot of CEOs will go to the board and go, hey, does anybody know anybody? And that's a non-programmatic approach. A programmatic approach is to say, you know, we've done the analysis. We know you know people in these companies. These are the people you know. Here's the program and the reach out. And all they have to do is cut and paste that into LinkedIn and send it, and it's done, right? So part of a programmatic approach is when you're looking for referrals, when you're looking to leverage your network, be more data centric in that, and make it much more simple. And then you follow up. The next meeting, the CEO goes, our board referral program is really working well. We've got 16 meetings with the following companies. It's generated a lot of pipeline for us. Here are the opportunities, but we're still struggling to get into these other 10 companies. can you help, right? And probably some members of the board have jumped in and participated, and some members have ignored it. But the fact that you now show pipeline and opportunities for other board members, now that puts pressure on the board members that have ignored that or done nothing or say, I don't know anybody, and so forth and so on. So again, it's a systematic and proactive approach. Now that's one that's CEO led, but you could have ones that are led by your VP of sales. You could have ones that are led by your head of account management. And all of these programs can be done both at the prospecting level and at the account penetration level as well. So you see the kind of, so what's really missing is a more sophisticated approach that's buyer centric, but B, a programming approach that's intelligent, data driven, and that's made easy for the person on the other end to make that referral, because there's nothing better than a referred introduction in B2B. That's the most powerful thing. And the same thing for your past customers. There's companies who have customers that have come and gone. They've gone to other companies. But if you say to the head of sales, who are the top 100 individuals that have left our company and gone to other companies, do you have a list of them? And what have you done to mine them? The answer would be, right? Maybe they've happenstance, found one guy on LinkedIn. Hey, I see Joe is now over at Cisco. Let's call him. And so the difference being is the really sophisticated VPs of sales are closely monitoring where our past customers are going, and they have a program to engage with them and add value to them. They still view them as in the community. They still invite them to events. They invite them to trade shows. They invite them to cocktail parties, whatever it is. They send them research and content. They give them exclusive things. So then when they reach out to them, they're like, well, I feel like McKinsey. I feel part of the family. I feel like I never left McKinsey. And McKinsey get a huge amount of referrals from that. So think about your network and have a programmatic view to fully leverage it. So that's one thing as well.
You have already started touching upon the different ways in which this whole thing can be done better, right? And one of the thing that you just covered is about the referral programs from your existing board members and employees and multiple other things. What are the other different ways to drive innovation, I would say, for this B2B development that we are looking at?
So one of the things that I find now is I look at the database of companies, and what I'm finding is that the databases are very poor. If you think about what's in a company's database, it's some portion of your existing customers, some portion of your prospects, and a whole bunch of trade shows and events that you went to that you collected information from in the past, right? So if you change that and you say, well, who is it that we want to sell to, and who are the customers that we want to land and expand and engage with? And you say, for example, we want to sell to these 500 prospects, and we want to sell to these 100 customers, and we want to go much deeper. The first step in the process then is let's build a database of everybody we want to talk to in those prospects, and let's go from having 5% of our addressable market in our database to 95% of our addressable market. And then let's go to all of the contacts that we have in our customers. Let's import all of that into our CRM, and then every week, let's say, how many new meetings do we have with these 500 prospects now that we have all the contacts with? Marketing, what are you doing to get us meetings? Sales, what are you doing to get us meetings? And you start tracking that and measuring that. The same thing for your account management guys. You say, here are 100 companies that we want to penetrate and we want to land and expand to, and how many new meetings do we have with those customers? Because the opportunity to land and expand is much easier than the prospecting side. However, the accountability of driving new meetings, new use cases, and expanding into those accounts is not there. So there's no pipeline in companies for current customers. It's not done in the same way. But you got to think about, if you're selling to Cisco, you're probably selling into 0.5% of the opportunity now, right? So you should think about your current customers as prospects too, and you should say, we have a 99% growth opportunity in this account. Here are the 200 people we need to engage with. We want to get 10 or 20 meetings with them in the next month to 2 months. So the database, the discipline around getting new meetings, measuring that both on a customer level and a prospect level is another key thing that I do. The other thing I do is what's called moderated prospect meetings, because if you think about these 256,000 reps, most enterprise buyers don't really want to deal with a rep with 1 month of experience. They don't want to deal with someone from another country. They don't want to, even whether they're from the US, whether they're from another country, they're a BDR and they're one of the 256,000. And they don't want to deal with them because they don't add much value to their business. They don't understand their business. They probably never will. So what I do for a lot of my clients is I reach out as a consultant, as a researcher, as an analyst. So I reach out, they say to me, hey, I want to have a meeting with the chief sales officer of these 100 companies. So I'll reach out to the chief sales officer and say, hey, I'm Michael Phelan from Go-to-Market Pros. I'm doing research on best practices in sales productivity. I'll give you a stipend or a donation for your charity if you participate in the study. And if you participate in the study, we'll send you the best in class research results. And by the way, here are the companies we've already talked to. And they'll look at that going, I need to be part of that, right? And when they come on the call, then I'll also introduce my client who'll be on the call. And the first part of the call, I'll ask them, what are you using today? What works well? What's missing? Tell me about your technology. What would you like to achieve in the future? Who's best in class and why? So these are very high level discovery questions, but my client gets to listen to all that. And then on the second half of the call, they get to add value and to get to share insights and build relationships. So they'll say, here's what we did, with another company just like yours, and here's the results we get. What do you think? Or they might say, our technology is a little bit different. Here's how we address that problem. Would you think that's a better way, right? Everything's a question. And slowly but surely, they get to know that prospect. They get to add some value. They connect with them on LinkedIn. Then later they send them a research paper. Then they invite them to a webinar and so forth. They start to nurture them. Sometimes on these calls, they say, hey, we have an active RFP process going right now. We're happy to include you. Sometimes they might say, boy, I'm not the right person to talk to, but you should talk to XYZ. And then when you publish the research, you invite them back to see the research, and they share that with the rest of their team. So the reason why moderated prospect meetings work so well is because it comes in at an analyst research level, and people value that and respect that much more. They want to see the results of the study. They want to participate, and they see you as kind of, much higher level resource that's worth their time and effort. And maybe they make some money, or maybe you give some money to their charity. So I interviewed the CMO of a major mattress company the other day, and he wanted to give money to the Ronald McDonald charities, and he's involved with that. So for half an hour of his time, he gives $200 to that charity. Is very happy. People are very happy when you give money to their charity. And this is another program that's used by a company in Boston called Rapid7. They're like a very successful company, and they find out what charities prospects are interested in, and they say, hey, I'd like to give $50 or $100 to, I see you're involved in an animal shelter. I'd like to give that to the animal shelter. If you could give us research feedback on our new product, if you could tell us what you think about this. And people have an emotional connection to their charities, and they thank you for that. Thank you for giving money to my charity, right? So I think what B2B sellers miss is they're not getting an emotional connection to their buyer. Buyers oftentimes buy on emotion and justify on rationale. So how do you tie into something that's emotionally valuable to them? And a lot of times the charities that they support is one area that's emotionally valued to them. So that's another programmatic approach. Give all the reps some money to donate to their prospect's charity in relation to a conversation around solving a problem is a much better strategy than sending them a food basket or a gift that arrives in their office, because that doesn't have the same emotional connection. So there's a lot of wasted money on sending swag, sending stuff, but much better to send something where people feel, wow, I'm glad I did that, that I helped someone else, right? Right now with Ukraine, there's a lot of money being donated to Ukraine. Is there a way that companies could raise money for that, and other things?
I was reading one of the blogs that you know, have written, and one of the terms stood out very clearly for me was magnet marketing,
Yeah.
right? To generate, leads or prospects. It seems like a good approach, right? So, do you want to shed some light on that?
Sure. So magnet marketing is a way of how do you draw these companies into you, based on their interest in what their best in class peers are doing. So I did a project for one of my clients, and they sell loyalty systems. So they wanted to talk to the top 100 retailers in the U.S. And they were a Canadian company. They had no customers in the US. So they were really struggling with their team to get meetings with the Walmarts of the world, the Targets of the world, the Amazons of the world, and they were getting rejected. So what I said is, let's come at this from a best practices methodology. Let's do a study in, advanced marketing personalization, and let's reach out and give them a stipend to themselves or to the research of their choice. And we ended up getting them like 100 top meetings with all of the top players in the industry. And they were able to use then that information to do webinars, and people were really interested in what they had to say. So think about a company like that going from nobody wants to talk to us to we had 100 conversations with the top players in the business, but it also educated their salespeople to be much more knowledgeable. Now their salespeople can jump on a call and they can say, we just had a conversation with Walmart yesterday, and this is really interesting, and so forth. So you can kind of use that in your dialogue. So you're uplifting the salespeople, but then the marketing people go out and publish the study, and they find that it was the highest performing content they ever did, because that's exactly what the retailers want to see, and that's exactly what they spend a lot of money paying these big consulting companies to do. Now you're giving it to them for free, so you're become a much more valued resource. But in the end of the day, they got a very large retailer out of this program. It was called Brooks Brothers. They didn't have a US based reference account, so they not only got a very large retailer out of it, but they got their first big reference account, which gave them a foothold in the US market. And now they're able to say, instead of saying Sears Canada is our customer, nobody cared about that. They say Brooks Brothers is our customer, and people go, oh, that's a good account to work with. Tell us more about what you're doing for them. So it elevated everything for marketing, for sales, and they learned a lot about the market. They had these great conversations. It informed their product development. It informed their packaging and positioning. It informed their demand gen, and it elevated the sales team. So that's again of a really programmatic approach, and it ran for a year and a half. We just kept doing it. And they kept spending more money on it because it was the only program that was getting the meetings. So they're spending all this money, going to various trade shows and, hoping that, these people would walk by, and they never did. And so they kind of, it became their gold standard for their, for their meeting generation. So what I'm encouraging sales and marketing people, spend on programs that directly generate meetings. Don't spend on programs that generate downloads. And this is what most marketers do, unfortunately. They buy syndicated content, they push out white papers, and we've all downloaded the white paper, we've all forgotten who published it, we've all saved it to our hard drive and never read it. Now, as far as marketing is concerned, now you're this great lead. Well, you're really not, and there's no interaction between the prospect and the company in a marketing download. And marketers think there is, because you download our assets, so therefore you're taking an action. But if I don't remember who published it, if I didn't read it, it's of no value. So what I encourage B2B marketers to do, and or sales, is take ownership of a process that drives interaction. And that can be interactive content, it can be chat, it can be anything. But so you want the prospect to interact with you at some level. If you're not driving some form of interaction, a meeting is the best, but there are lots of others. Email back and forth, is certainly one. But if you're not driving interaction, you're not driving meetings, then there's not much of a prospect engagement. So I say to marketers, stop wasting your money on marketing downloads, because the salespeople can't convert them to meetings. Take most of that money and drive it into programs that drive meetings and interactions, and therefore sales would be much happier. Your ROI on your marketing would be much happier. But still to this day, there's people spending tens of millions of dollars on these marketing downloads, and asking why isn't sales converting them to meetings, and the answer is because there's nothing to convert.
Yeah,
So
true. When you talk about these approaches, right, Michael, and you have talked about at least three or four approaches in which the business development for organizations can be scaled, right, including peers, including this magnet marketing and multiple other things, right. A, a lot of these things, if I talk about non-software industries, I mean, let's talk about traditional industries. If I'm a seller and I want to sell to traditional industries, not a lot of these people are on LinkedIn. They are not available upfront, right? How do you even reach out to them in that case? How do
yeah.
you find their right contact, right, people who you should be reaching out to, and different ways in which you can reach out to?
Yeah, there are some industries that, for one reason or another, are not very effective on social selling.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. I've done some work in the IT space.
Sorry to cut you off there, but it's not just about their social presence or
Yeah.
social skill. It's also about no presence at all. So you don't even know who to reach out to in those companies, right?
Oh, I
So
see.
it
Okay.
becomes a problem. Yeah. So how
Yeah.
do you go about solving these problems in general when you implement these different programs?
Yeah. So, the thing is some of these very traditional industries, like for example, manufacturing, is some aspects of manufacturing are very scientific and very advanced, but some of them are very, very traditional. So if you're making, let's say, plastics components, or you're making a very old fashioned product, right? You may not be on social media at all. And even if you are, you're probably not going to respond because you don't even look at it, right? So I do think you're right. There are a lot of people who are scraping or accessing social media profiles and using that as a way of engaging. You have to come at customers with multiple options. So I'll give you an example. The other day, I had somebody that I invited to a research interview, said no on LinkedIn, not interested, don't call me. so
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
sent them an email, and they go, "Oh, this is really interesting. I'd love to participate." So in one channel they say no, in another channel they say yes. But in more traditional industries, there's a couple of things that I find is, you've got to get inside that network and start to get referrals. So,
Oh,
and there may be some organizations, like if you look at traditional organizations like manufacturing, for example, in the state of Massachusetts, there's an association of manufacturing industries that does a lot of face-to-face networking. So sometimes you can kind of come at them, with more of a face-to-face approach. Sometimes old-fashioned phone, call them on their cell phone, call them on their, can be more effective. Sometimes text can be more effective. But what you've got to figure out is, what's their preferred channel of communication? How do they find out about new products? Is it through associations? Is it through certain networks? Are they much more phone people, or much more text people? Like, I find sometimes it's funny. You'll send a voicemail to somebody, they won't respond. You'll send a text to them, they will. But you gotta kind of figure out that industry. It's funny with the IT folks. One of the things I find, particularly the security ops type folks, a lot of people want to sell to CISOs, right?
mhm.
And those guys, they may be on social media, but they're very paranoid because of the attacks on their company, right? So they're not
Right.
going to react to an email, and they're not going to
Right.
react to LinkedIn, even though they may see it. What they do react to is if you can find anybody that knows them that can say, "Hey, I just did an interview with Michael on this new study. It was great. He paid me a stipend, or I donated money to charity. I mentioned him to you," right? So you kind of you get one or two people, you get them to give you 10 people, you get 10 people to give you 100 people. So sometimes you gotta nearly get a personal referral. And I got that guy on the phone and he said, I've never talked to anybody like you in my life. I don't take any sales calls. I don't take any research calls, but because you know John and you did, so you got to kind of figure your way in, and then you've got to establish some credibility with them. Some of that could be a content, like if you publish some research, they're probably going to download the research with a fake ID, or they're going to put like their personal ID because they don't want to identify themselves as their company, but they might well have some exposure to your brand. And what I found too a lot of times is people will respond to their Gmail, but not their business email. So a lot of marketing people, a lot of business people, they have their Gmails on their LinkedIn, and they ignore their business emails, because when they're in a business mode, they're like, I can't deal with all these vendors calling me. When they're in a personal mode, they're kind of scrolling through who sent a Gmail to me. So sometimes even a different email from a different network can get attention. So it's all about knowing your audience. Who's your audience? How did they find out about new products? Are they very referential driven? And there's no doubt you've got to try a bunch of things with each audience and figure out, for this audience, this is what works.
True. Well, that makes sense, and this has been one of the major reasons that, as an issue that most of the sellers today are facing, where they don't know who to reach out to in case that person is not available on LinkedIn. I think one of the advices that I will take away from this whole conversation definitely is going to get into that referral network, right? Of those people who are on the inside, right? So try to get into their referral network and see if you can get those meetings initially to start going. I think this research way definitely appeals a lot. Very interesting. Michael, towards the end of the conversation, I would really love to understand from you any recommendations that you have for salespeople to read, so that they can gain more knowledge around business development and more innovations in business development.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I tend to look at kind of peer-driven networks. So Modern Sales Pros is one that I look at, and it's it's a lot going on in it. It's kind of, and it's not necessarily well structured, but they're chatting like thousands of them. People are saying, hey, what's the best company to do this, or how do I solve this problem, and or what's going on in rep compensation, or why is it that 40% of reps are missing their quota. So the good side is you've got this great network that are responsive. You can ask them questions, you can post content. The challenging side of it is, not all of it will be relevant to you, and it's kind of disorganized and so forth and so on. But I love that. I participate in other groups that are more marketing oriented. There's a group in Boston, for example, that's Any Excuses. They have about 2,000 people that are in the marketing area. They don't like selling on the network, so you got to kind of make sure that you're not promoting your product or service, but you're adding value. But people constantly reach out, hey, who knows a good vendor in XYZ, and who's the best person to do a Salesforce HubSpot implementation, I meant to say. So the kind of networks where it's peer driven, that's what I like. I mean, I read Inc. So certainly they have great. Forbes has great content. So some of those type of business oriented magazines are great. Harvard Business Review publishes tremendous content, and I like that as well. Then the other thing I would suggest is share those content with your network. You wanna curate content for your network, so when you see something that you enjoy, that's relevant to what you do, that's relevant to your network, share it and add comments. And the final thing I'd say is LinkedIn surveys is a very interesting one on LinkedIn, where if you can get your network to respond to a really pertinent, relevant question, and then you can use that as an opportunity to engage with them. It's being overused a bit now, but so again, that's an interactive piece. Anything that will cause your network, your supporters and your prospects to interact with you and have that conversation is a good thing to do.
Interesting. This was it, Michael. All the questions that I had. That brings me to the end of the podcast. It was an incredibly insightful session, and I think I myself, learned a lot on how to look into the referrals plus the research perspective. Fairly important. Thank you again for coming on Sales Gambit.
Okay, thanks, Ashish.